In 1901, sponge divers pulling treasure out of a Roman-era shipwreck hauled up a lump of corroded bronze about the size of a brick. Nobody thought much of it. It sat in a museum drawer in Athens for months while everyone fussed over the marble statues and the gold jewelry. Then the bronze lump cracked open as it dried, and someone noticed something impossible inside it: gear teeth. Tiny, precise, interlocking gear teeth cut by hand more than 2,000 years ago. That object is now called the Antikythera Mechanism, named after the little Greek island the ship sank near. And here's the part that's hard to get your head around. It is, by any reasonable definition, an analog computer, a geared calculating machine built somewhere around the 2nd century BCE, which means it predates the next device of comparable complexity by something like 1,000 to 1,400 years. There is nothing else like it from the ancient world. Not a simpler version, not a clumsier prototype. It just appears, fully formed, and then the entire technology vanishes from the historical record for over a millennium. Let me be careful here because this is exactly the kind of story that gets exaggerated. So I want to separate what we actually know from what people like to imagine. And the honest truth is that what we know is somehow stranger than the myths. It helps to picture where it came from. The wreck sits about 50 meters down, deep enough that the early divers were working at the edge of what a human body can survive in a canvas suit and a copper helmet. One diver reportedly died and others were paralyzed bringing up that cargo. The ship had been carrying luxury goods, statues, glassware, fine furniture, almost certainly bound for a wealthy buyer when it went down around the 1st century BCE. The mechanism was just one item among the freight. Whoever owned it valued it enough to ship it across the sea, which already tells you it was something special. Start with the basics. The mechanism was found in pieces. Today there are 82 surviving fragments, most of them small, badly corroded, fused together by 20 centuries underwater. For decades, nobody could really tell what it did. People guessed it was some kind of astrolabe or a navigational tool or even a fake that had fallen into the wreck later. It took a very long time and some genuinely clever detective work before the picture came together. The breakthroughs came from imaging. In the 2000s, a team brought in a giant custom-built X-ray machine, an 8-ton thing, to scan the fragments without cutting them open. They used a technique that let them peer through the layers of corrosion and read the structure underneath. And what they found was staggering. Inside that brick-sized box there had been at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, possibly more that didn't survive. The largest gear had over 200 individual teeth, each one cut by hand to within a fraction of a millimeter. So what did all those gears do? They modeled the sky. You turned a handle on the side, and the machine calculated the positions of the sun and the moon against the background of the stars. It tracked the phases of the moon using a clever little rotating ball, half black and half silver. It followed the cycle of the zodiac and the Egyptian calendar on dials around the front. And the people who built it understood that the moon doesn't move across the sky at a steady speed. It speeds up and slows down. To reproduce that, they used a pair of gears, mounted slightly off-center, with a little pin and slot, so that one gear would drive the other a bit faster, then a bit slower, in exactly the rhythm the real moon follows. That is a genuinely sophisticated idea. They were encoding the irregularity of an orbit into bronze, centuries before anyone wrote down the physics behind it. The back of the device was, if anything, even more impressive. There were two large spiral dials. One of them tracked a 19-year cycle that brings the solar and lunar calendars back into sync. The other followed a longer cycle, about 18 years, used to predict eclipses. And the eclipse dial didn't just say an eclipse was coming. It carried little inscriptions noting whether it would be a solar or lunar eclipse, roughly what time of day, and in some cases even the expected color or the direction of the wind, which were the kinds of omens ancient observers cared about. There was a small dial that counted down the years to the major Greek athletic games, including the Olympics. Someone built a calendar of the Olympics into a hand-cranked astronomical computer. It is such a human, almost charming detail. And remember, all of this came out of a corroded brick. The reason we know any of it is that researchers cross-checked the X-ray scans against thousands of tiny Greek letters etched onto the surviving plates. some of them no taller than a grain of rice. Those inscriptions describe what the dials showed and how the cycles worked, like a manual fuse to the machine, it explains. People have since built working physical reconstructions in brass and even in modern materials, and the remarkable thing is that they run. You turn the crank and the pointers move the way the inscriptions say they should. That's about as close to proof as this kind of archaeology gets. Now, here's where I have to slow down and be honest about the limits of what we know, because the gaps are real. We don't know who made it, nobody's name is on it. There are theories that connect it to the school of Archimedes, who had died decades earlier but whose tradition of mechanical thinking lived on, and other theories tying it to astronomers working on the island of Rhodes. The inscriptions on the device, a kind of user's manual etched into the bronze, hint at a connection to a particular region, but they don't name a maker. So when you read a confident claim that Archimedes built this, treat that as a guess dressed up as a fact. We genuinely don't know. We don't know how many of these existed. This could have been a unique masterpiece, a one of a kind showpiece for a wealthy patron, or it could have been one of dozens, the surviving example of a whole craft tradition that simply rotted away because bronze gets melted down and reused and doesn't survive well. The quality of the workmanship actually argues for the second possibility. It doesn't look like a first attempt, it looks like the product of people who had made these before, who had worked out the bugs. But it looks practiced is an impression, not proof. We have exactly one of these. A single data point is a hard thing to reason from, and we don't really know why the technology disappeared. This is the part that fuels all the wild speculation, so let me handle it carefully. It is tempting to imagine some lost golden age of ancient robotics that got erased. There is no evidence for that. What's much more likely is quieter and sadder. Knowledge in the ancient world lived in small numbers of skilled people and fragile scrolls, workshops closed, apprentices weren't trained, libraries burned or simply decayed. A craft this specialized, depending on a rare combination of astronomical theory and precision metalwork, could be carried by a handful of people in a handful of cities. Lose them, and you lose the whole thing, not because of some catastrophe, but through ordinary neglect. The skill to build geared astronomical machines really does seem to vanish from Europe until the elaborate clockwork of the medieval period, more than 1,000 years later. So, what should we actually take from this? For me, the lesson isn't ancient aliens or lost super civilization. Those explanations actually make the story smaller because they take the achievement away from the people who earned it. The real lesson is about us, about human beings. Roughly 2,000 years ago, somebody sat down with bronze and files and an understanding of the heavens, and they built a machine to hold the motion of the cosmos in their hands. They did it without electricity, without modern tools, without anyone before them to copy. They were as clever as we are. They just had less to stand on. And the second lesson is humbling. If this had stayed at the bottom of the sea, or if those sponge divers had passed over that one wreck, we would have absolutely no idea this level of ancient engineering ever existed. We would confidently teach that geared computing began in the medieval world, and we would be completely wrong. It makes you wonder what else we're confidently wrong about simply because the evidence rusted away or was melted down or was never found. The Antikythera Mechanism isn't just a marvel, it's a warning about how thin and accidental our knowledge of the past really is. The fragments are still being studied. Researchers are still arguing about exactly how the front display worked, still building physical reconstructions to test their theories, still finding new letters hidden in the corrosion. It's an open case, and it might stay open for a long time. But every time I look at a photo of those green broken gears, I think about the person who cut the last tooth on that 200-tooth wheel, checked that it meshed, and turned the handle to watch the moon move. They have been gone for 20 centuries. The machine they made is still trying to tell us what they knew. Thanks for spending a little time in the strange and wonderful past with me. If you enjoyed this, stick around. There's always another mystery worth looking at, honestly.